It was a picture-perfect summer morning in Maplewood Heights, the kind of day that made the birdsong sweeter and the breeze feel like silk. Sunlight streamed through the Johnson family's kitchen windows as the smell of fresh coffee mingled with the scent of pancakes sizzling on the stove. Marcus Johnson, a tall, calm presence with a quiet intensity behind his eyes, poured a steaming cup for his wife Denise, while their teenage daughter Keisha scrolled on her phone across the table. Just as Denise reached for the local community newsletter, her hand froze. Her brow furrowed. The bold headline on the front page sent a chill down her spine. Enforced compliance or eviction, HOA cracks down. Underneath was a notice, highlighted in red ink, accusing the Johnsons of violating Code 11.3 shrubbery height requirements. Denise's mouth tightened into a thin line. "Marcus, it's another one, another fine," she said, her voice trembling. Keisha looked up, concerned. "Again? But we just trimmed everything last weekend." Marcus took the paper from Denise and scanned it quickly. He didn't speak right away, his jaw locked. His hands were steady, but inside, a slow anger burned. This wasn't the first time. 3 weeks earlier, Wallace, the HOA president, had sent a similar violation for unauthorized basketball equipment. That time, someone had physically removed Keisha's hoop and left it in pieces on the curb without warning. No explanation, no appeal. "They want us gone," Denise said, barely above a whisper. Marcus nodded slowly. He walked to the window and stared out at their immaculate front yard. The hedges were trimmed with military precision. The lawn was lush and even. Nothing was out of place. He had worked too hard to let someone's prejudice rewrite the truth. Across the street, Robert Wallace stood on his porch, sipping his coffee with smug satisfaction. He watched the Johnsons' home like a hawk, scanning for anything he could twist into a violation. To him, their presence was an intrusion, a disruption of the Maplewood aesthetic he believed he alone controlled. That afternoon, Marcus and Denise attended the HOA's monthly open meeting. Inside the clubhouse, Wallace presided from a raised platform like a self-appointed king. The room smelled faintly of lemon polish and old coffee. Papers rustled as board members took their seats. Without so much as a nod of acknowledgement, Wallace called the meeting to order and launched into his agenda. "There have been repeat offenses by a certain household. Continued disregard for community standards," he declared loudly, scanning the room but resting his eyes on Marcus for a beat too long. Denise reached for Marcus's hand under the table. Her grip was tight. "We expect compliance," Wallace continued, "or legal action may be necessary." Marcus's voice was calm, but the edge in it was unmistakable. "We've received the notices, and we'd like a copy of the regulations being used to justify them." Wallace's smile was cold. "Everything's in the handbook. Perhaps it just needs a more thorough reading." Whispers rippled through the room. One board member, a woman named Evelyn, who always wore pearls, shifted uncomfortably. She looked toward Marcus with something like sympathy, but she said nothing. When the meeting ended, Wallace remained seated, flipping through papers with theatrical boredom. As Marcus and Denise walked past, he muttered just loud enough, "Some people think owning a house means they belong here." Marcus stopped in his tracks. He turned, but Denise pulled gently at his sleeve. "Not here," she whispered. Back home, the tension settled over the house like a thick fog. Keisha had retreated to her room. Denise stood at the sink, washing a clean dish just to keep her hands busy. "I thought we moved here for peace," she said. "I thought this neighborhood was different." Marcus said nothing. Instead, he walked down the hallway to a locked cabinet, pulled out a thin leather folder, and placed it on the kitchen table. Inside were documents, purchase agreements, deeds, and property maps. Not just for their home, but for 11 others. He looked at Denise, his voice low and steady. "They don't know, Dee. We own almost half the block. Denise blinked. But you said it was better they didn't. I thought keeping quiet would keep things quiet, Marcus said. But silence hasn't protected us. She sat down slowly. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Denise said what they both were already thinking. We have to fight back. That night, Marcus sat alone in his study. Framed law degrees lined the wall, reminders of a past life as one of the city's top real estate attorneys. He had walked away from that world for something simpler, something calmer. But now, that old part of him stirred. He opened his laptop and began drafting. Not just emails, but a plan. A meticulous, calculated plan built on contracts, statutes, and leverage. If Wallace wanted to play legal games, Marcus was more than ready. The first document he saved was titled HOA Strategy, Phase 1. As he clicked Save, he glanced toward the window, where streetlights bathed the quiet neighborhood in a pale glow. He whispered to himself, almost like a promise, "Let's see who really owns Maplewood Heights." The days that followed were a slow descent into tension. Each morning, Denise opened the mailbox with a sinking heart. Tucked among utility bills and grocery coupons were fresh HOA citations, their language becoming increasingly absurd. One morning, it was a $75 fine for color disharmony between their flower pots and mailbox. The next, a warning about unauthorized outdoor furniture, referring to a single lawn chair Keisha had dragged out to read in. At first, they laughed. Then they stopped laughing. By the end of the week, Denise found a fee for a supposed noise violation, time-stamped 3:17 a.m. They had all been asleep. "This is harassment," she muttered, tossing the letter onto the table with trembling hands. Marcus was already ahead of her. His laptop stayed open nearly all day now. The folder labeled Evidence had grown fat, filled with time-stamped photos of their yard, security footage of HOA staff trespassing, and voice recordings taken discreetly at meetings. One file captured Wallace's assistant muttering, "They think their money makes them better than the rules." Another recorded Wallace himself at a board dinner, laughing. "They'll leave eventually. They always do." What disturbed Marcus more than the words was how comfortable they sounded saying them. Keisha, once vibrant and full of laughter, now moved quietly through the house. Her friends from the neighborhood stopped visiting. One girl whispered to her at school, "My mom said your family is trying to take over the block." Keisha didn't reply. She just nodded, walked away, and cried behind the gym. That night, Denise broke. She stood in the living room, eyes red, holding what was left of Keisha's basketball hoop. It had been dismantled again, this time dumped unceremoniously into their recycling bin. "I don't feel safe here anymore," she said. "Not because of crime, because of him." Marcus took the broken rim from her gently, like it was something sacred. Then he turned, walked to his study, and shut the door. Inside, he picked up the phone and made the first call, to an old colleague who now specialized in civil rights litigation. Then another, to a reporter he once helped during a land dispute involving a corrupt developer, and another to a city zoning expert. By midnight, Marcus had a plan. Not revenge, resolution. He filed 3 formal complaints with the State Housing Authority. He submitted all evidence to the local Civil Rights Commission. And then, quietly and meticulously, he began drafting a federal lawsuit, Johnson v. Maplewood Heights HOA et al., alleging racial discrimination, defamation, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. Meanwhile, Wallace doubled down HOA. Flyers began appearing on windshields and doorsteps. "Save our neighborhood. Say no to outsiders who don't respect tradition." His words weren't subtle. They weren't meant to be. He couched it in language about community values and preserving harmony, but the message was clear. The Johnsons didn't belong, But what Wallace hadn't counted on was that people were watching. At first it was a whisper, then a current. A neighbor posted anonymously on the town Facebook page. "I used to believe Wallace, but I've seen the Johnsons' lawn. It's pristine. What's really going on here?" Another wrote, "Why are they getting fined every day, and my trash can's been on the curb since Monday?" Then came the rumor that changed everything. An anonymous tip to a local journalist revealed that Marcus Johnson wasn't just a homeowner, he was an investor. A deep dive article dropped 3 days later, headline in bold across the town's morning paper. HOA president accused of harassment. Family quietly owns half the block. The article detailed Wallace's escalating behavior. It included quotes from neighbors, statements from civil rights lawyers, and, most damning, public property records showing the Johnsons had quietly acquired 12 of the 24 homes in Maplewood Heights over the past 6 years. The community reeled. Some residents were angry, not at the Johnsons, but at themselves. They had stood by while a family was being harassed, unaware that same family had helped stabilize property values, repaired abandoned homes, and even paid for landscaping in shared spaces out of pocket. Mrs. Patterson, the elderly woman next door who once baked cookies for Keisha, knocked on their door the next evening. Her hands shook as she offered a lemon pie. "I didn't know, Marcus," she said softly. "I didn't know what they were doing to you. And I'm sorry." Denise accepted the pie with tears in her eyes. But Wallace wasn't done. Fueled by desperation, he called an emergency HOA board meeting, urging them to vote for eminent enforcement. He ranted about preserving standards, about removing elements of discord. He didn't realize a local reporter had slipped in quietly and was recording the entire meeting. That video would go viral by morning. As the media storm grew, Marcus received a phone call from the district attorney's office. They were reviewing Wallace's actions for potential civil violations. Keisha, seeing her father so focused, so composed, asked him quietly, "Do you think this is going to work?" Marcus paused, looked at her, and said, "We're not just defending ourselves, sweetheart. We're drawing a line, so no one else has to go through this." 3 days later, a subpoena was delivered to Wallace's home. The lawsuit was official. A court date was set. And in a stroke of poetic irony, Marcus filed the suit from an address that Wallace had never bothered to notice was no longer his neighbor's rental, but Marcus's investment property. That night, Marcus sat alone in his study again, the UC glow of the screen reflecting in his eyes. He opened the master file and added the final document. Intentional infliction of emotional distress, exhibits A through H. He exhaled, not with relief, but with readiness. The storm had arrived. And for once, Marcus Johnson was holding the lightning. It happened faster than anyone expected. 2 days after Marcus Johnson's lawsuit hit the county court docket, the HOA board, rattled by press inquiries, legal pressure, and fear of personal liability, called for an emergency meeting. This time, they didn't gather in the cozy back room of the clubhouse. They needed the auditorium at the local elementary school to accommodate the crowd. Hundreds showed up. Some came out of curiosity, others out of guilt. But many arrived out of anger. Anger that their neighborhood had been turned into a national spectacle, that property values were threatened, and most of all, that they had trusted a man like Robert Wallace with unchecked power. Wallace stood stiffly at the podium, sweat glistening at his temples. His trademark smugness had drained from his face. He gripped the edges of the lectern and tried to speak with conviction. "This has all been taken out of context," he began. "There's been a coordinated smear campaign against me and, frankly, against the values this community was built on." A groan rippled through the crowd. Then a voice from the middle row rose. Mrs. Patterson, trembling but firm, "Is harassment a community value now?" Whispers turned to murmurs. Wallace faltered. He tried to push forward, citing bylaws, miscommunications, misunderstood intentions. But the board, now entirely aware that they too could be named in a civil suit, was done covering for him. They called for a vote, immediate removal of Robert Wallace as HOA president. The count was swift, unanimous. Wallace's mouth fell open in disbelief. "You can't do this," he said. "You need due process." A board member, a retired judge, cut him off. "This is your due process." Wallace dropped his gavel on the floor. It rolled in a slow, sad arc. No one moved to pick it up. The back of the room, Marcus rose to his feet. He walked to the front, calmly and deliberately, like a man who had carried a weight for too long and was finally ready to set it down. He looked out across the crowd, then locked eyes with Wallace. "Maplewood Heights belongs to all of us, not just the ones who look like you, or sound like you, or worship like you. My family has followed every rule. We've landscaped more properties on this street than your own committee. We've invested not just money, but trust." He paused. His voice dropped slightly, more intimate. "But trust can't grow where fear is planted." Silence fell. Even the cicadas outside seemed to hush. Marcus turned to the crowd. "This was never about lawns. It was about control. And we allowed a bully to hide behind rules to target a family he didn't understand and didn't want here. I hope we're better than that. I think we are." The room erupted into applause. Not the kind for a victory, but for something harder. Recognition. But the real reckoning came the next morning. A court order arrived at Wallace's door at 7:14 a.m. A judge had reviewed the preliminary evidence and issued an injunction. The bylaws that had been used to fine the Johnsons were declared unenforceable under state anti-discrimination laws. The HOA's power to issue citations was suspended indefinitely, pending full audit. Then came the second envelope. It was from a property management firm, acting on behalf of a private holding company. The firm now held the deed to Wallace's own house. Wallace didn't understand, until he saw the name at the bottom of the transfer papers, Johnson Estates, LLC. Marcus had bought the house months earlier, during Wallace's refinance scramble. Through a shell company, quietly, legally. Now the man who tried to evict Marcus Johnson's family was himself served a 60-day notice to vacate. Wallace stood on his porch, disbelieving, as neighbors watched in stunned silence. Some looked away. Others didn't bother to hide their satisfaction. Karma, when it moves quick in suburbia. Across the street, the Johnsons' home bloomed. Neighbors arrived with flowers, casseroles, awkward apologies, and offers to repaint fences or mow lawns. Keisha's friends returned with shy grins and basketballs under their arms. One girl confessed, "My mom said you were dangerous." I think she was wrong. Keisha just smiled. "It's okay. People believe things when they're scared." Denise stood on the porch with Marcus that evening, watching the street slowly settle into peace. "I'm proud of you," she whispered. Marcus looked out over the homes, many of which now quietly belonged to their family. "We didn't buy this street to take it. We bought it to protect it." She leaned her head against his shoulder. That night, Marcus uploaded the last set of documents into the evidence folder. Then he clicked Save and Backup, and finally, Close. The folder name changed from Evidence to Justice. In the final scene, Marcus narrates as we see the neighborhood restored, kids playing, neighbors chatting, repairs being made. Discrimination rarely screams. It whispers through policy, nods through bureaucracy, and hides behind civility. But when you know your rights, when you stand your ground, and when you fight not with anger but with proof, then you change the story. For your family, for your block, for everyone watching. The screen fades to black. White text appears. Know your rights. Fight smart. Invest where it matters. And remember, sometimes the best revenge is owning the land under your enemy's feet. 6 months had passed. Maplewood Heights was quieter now, less tense, more real. The perfectly pruned hedges were still there, but now kids' bikes leaned casually against them. Sidewalk chalk drawings bloomed on the corners. Neighbors waved. Longer. Conversations didn't end when Marcus Johnson walked by. They started. The HOA had been restructured, its new board diverse and community elected. The old bylaws were rewritten with transparency and fairness. And every month, Marcus attended those meetings, not to monitor, but to mentor. Keisha, now entering high school, had started a community gardening club. What began as a project for her biology class turned into weekend workshops on native plants, soil care, and neighborhood beautification. Her voice, once quiet, now carried with clarity and confidence. One Saturday morning, as she tended the community bed outside the clubhouse, Mrs. Patterson approached, carrying a small tray of seedlings. "Peonies," she said gently. "My husband used to grow them. Thought they might belong here now." Keisha smiled and took the tray with care. "They will." Inside the Johnson home, Marcus sat at his desk, reviewing a proposal to develop affordable housing units just outside town, using profits from the neighborhood rentals. He was no longer just a retired real estate attorney. He was becoming something more, a quiet force of equity. Denise walked in, holding 2 mugs of tea. "You're building again," she teased. He nodded. "Not houses this time. Something bigger." She placed a hand on his shoulder. "Just don't forget to build rest in there, too." They laughed. In that moment, it wasn't about lawsuits or victory. It was about roots, deep ones. That evening, the family sat on the front porch, watching the sky melt into warm lavender. Keisha leaned her head on her father's arm. "Do you think they'll ever forget what happened?" she asked. Marcus looked out across the street, where neighbors were stringing up lights for an upcoming block party. "I hope they don't," he said, "because remembering is how we grow better, not bitter." As the screen fades to black, Marcus's voice returns, low, reflective, resolute. "Power without justice divides, but ownership with purpose heals. Never underestimate what one family can do when they refuse to be pushed out, and instead choose to rise and root themselves in the place they were told they didn't belong. That's not just surviving, that's claiming your ground."